Because I think it's important for us to understand what can affect our space so we can be mindful of it, we don't have fear around it, and then we know what to do, in terms of, can we clear this, do we need to move, that type of thing, So I think it's going to be a helpful episode for people, and I think that it's important information because there's so much misinformation out there about this sort of stuff too. So we're going to be talking about this from a frequency perspective, and I think when people think of the unseen affecting physical spaces that we're in, most people think about the haunted house, right? Like that's the typical thing that people think about. So they think about the dead and how the dead can affect a space. Now there's a lot of like Hollywood movie around this particular idea. And so just for people to know, the dead are not all the same. Right? And we talked about this I talked about this in an episode called Demystifying the Dead. So if you don't know how the dead are and that there are different groups of them and they behave differently and they have different sort of reasons for doing what they do, I really recommend watching that. It's quite a lengthy episode. I think it's like 40 minutes, but it's quite detailed. So I would recommend going to watch that. But for the dead that affect physical space, typically, they're the dead that are lower in resonance, because most of the dead, when you come out of the physical body and you're disembodied, most people, or a number of people, will start to rise in their frequency resonance and then become more awake or start to move into a higher order. The ghosts that we have heard about in story or in film or whatever are actually the dead who either don't know they're dead, and or are denser in resonance. And that's why they're still associated with the human realm.
Got it.
And that's why we can even perceive them physically, right? People will see ghosts, right? Because they actually have a form. And that actually is an indication of how low the resonance is, because you actually can physically perceive them with your physical eyes, which is kind of amazing, right? Because the dead, the higher they go in resonance, the less we can perceive them physically, because they start to vibrate at a rate that's higher than what we can perceive with our physical eyes. But, so the dead can, because they're hanging around and can affect spaces. So I just want to back up out of this and say, a lot of people think that cemeteries are where the dead hang out, but it's not. They actually will typically go to a place that they were comfortable in or that they liked or that they have familiarity with, right? They'll go there. They don't hang around in a place where their body is. They don't care about their body.
Right.
Makes sense? A lot of the ones you can physically see don't even know they're dead. So they're not looking for their body. You know what I mean? They just don't even know.
They probably go home.
Yeah, they go home. Yeah. Exactly. So they'll go to physical locations. And if you go to an old city like London or Paris or some of these or even New York City or, in Asia, wherever, where you have very, very old cities, there are a lot of dead there. And they're going because that's where home was, right? And so if they're affecting your physical space by moving things or rattling doors or windows or playing with electricity or whatever it is that they're doing, it is possible to clear them out of a space, okay, on spirit level. There are people other than me who do this, who specialize in clearing spaces. But I think it's really important when you clear space that you, to some degree, have some compassion and also cross them over into pure source. Because in order to cross over into pure source, so just backing up, just because you're dead doesn't mean you've crossed over. It means you're dead. It means you're not in your body. That's it. In order to cross over into that pure source frequency, you have to be awake. So someone like me can help them transition into that space of that infinite field of pure source energy. And there are others who can do this too. So it's not just about clearing the space and like shoving the dead out of your space. It's about crossing them over, because then everybody wins, right? Your space is clear, they're crossed over.
They won't come back.
They won't come back because they're very happy where they are. They don't need to come back to your house.
Problem solved.
Problem solved for everybody, right? So that's like the more ideal thing. The dead can also, even if they don't know you, and so for example, in Hawaii, there's a very strong culture of the dead, right? They revere their dead, they honor them. And so there can be in the land, like the dead will move around and they can come into spaces that people live in because they're moving around. And things like, wild pigs will come into spaces and stuff like, things can happen where animals just seem to come all the time. And sometimes that's because the dead are there. And it's important to clear the land of that, just delineate like where's yours, and for them to sort of not come into that space. And so they stay outside of that. So things like clearing the land or clearing a house can be really helpful so that your space feels good to you.